Once upon a time, 5 years ago, when Inga was marrying Artem Kamenev, the July sun flooded the banquet hall of the rooftop restaurant. It seemed to her that there would be nothing happier in her life than this day. Her father, Valery Andreevich Mitrofanov, owner of the construction holding Mitrofanov Development, whose residential complexes rose throughout southern Russia from Krasnodar to Volgograd, raised a glass of champagne and announced that he was gifting the newlyweds a penthouse on the Don embankment. 180 square meters with a view of the water, valued at 58 million rubles. "This is the foundation," he said then, looking at his daughter with the tenderness she remembered from childhood, from those times when she was still very small. "The foundation for your shared life. Build something real on it." Artem hugged his father-in-law, shook his hand for a long time, thanked him in a hurried, fervent manner, and in his eyes sparkled something that Inga took for tears of happiness. She cried with joy, clinging to her husband, and didn't see how her father, turning to the window, slightly narrowed his eyes with that squint she had learned to recognize since childhood, when Dad sat down for negotiations with yet another partner. Having gone through the wild 90s, he had long learned not to trust pretty words. The gift agreement took up 40 pages of strictly legal text. Artem signed it without looking, hurrying back to the guests and dancers, not bothering to study a single clause. This negligence, committed in the euphoria of the windfall wealth, would cost him everything. Valery Andreevich folded his copy into his briefcase and allowed himself a short, almost imperceptible smile because somewhere on the 27th page, in a paragraph printed in small font, hid a revocable condition. According to Article 578 of the Civil Code, in the event of dissolution of the marriage at the initiative or fault of the donee, the apartment returns to the donor. In addition, an encumbrance was entered into it, namely a prohibition on any alienation without the written consent of Valery Andreevich. This legal mechanism, unknown to neither Inga nor her groom, was insurance from a far-sighted strategist who understood human nature far better than his own daughter. They lived 5 years as thousands of young couples do. Breakfasts in the spacious kitchen with a view of the river, where the morning sun lay in golden stripes on the marble countertop, his career growth at Yugostroy, where he rose to commercial director, her job as an English teacher at a private school in central Rostov for a modest 52,000 a month. Inga could have not worked at all. Her father offered her a position in the holding, a job with a fancy title and a salary 3 times higher, but she refused. "I want it on my own," she explained to her mother over the phone then. "You understand, so that it's mine, earned for real." Her mother-in-law, Yulia Stepanovna, a simple woman from Novocherkassk, was initially wary, eyeing her daughter-in-law from the golden youth with poorly concealed distrust, but gradually thawed. At least that's how it seemed to Inga. By the 3rd year of marriage, they were already choosing curtains for the living room together, discussing recipes and holiday plans, and Inga naively took this ostentatious warmth for genuine kinship of souls, not understanding that her mother-in-law's affection was directly tied to the financial well-being of the Mitrofanov family. "You're a good girl," Yulia Stepanovna would say, patting her daughter-in-law's hand. "Artem is lucky with you." Inga believed every word. She generally believed people easily, and her father called this trait her main weakness and main strength at the same time. Everything changed one Saturday evening when the 3 of them were dining in the living room, and outside the window, the lights on the opposite bank of the Don were slowly fading. Yulia Stepanovna was just telling about a neighbor who divorced after 20 years of marriage and now wandered through rented corners. And she thought it was forever too. When Inga's phone rang. "Dad," she smiled, bringing the receiver to her ear. "Hi, we are just here." Her father's voice stopped her mid-sentence, unfamiliar, devoid of the usual warmth, mechanical and dead. "Inga, I need to tell you something." She went out to the balcony, closing the glass door behind her, and the wind from the Don immediately tousled her hair, while somewhere below, evening traffic jams impatiently honked. "The holding went bankrupt," her father said in the same lifeless voice. "I trusted the wrong partners, invested everything in a residential complex project that failed. The banks revoked the credit line. We lost everything. The house, the apartment in central Rostov, the business. Everything. Inga, absolutely everything." The phone slipped from her numb fingers and hit the balcony tile. Inga stared at it lying screen up and couldn't force herself to bend down and pick it up because her whole body was numb, refusing to obey. Artem appeared a minute later, picked up the phone, listened to his father-in-law's hurried explanations, nodding from time to time. Inga watched her husband's face, how concern turned to confusion, then to something else she couldn't name right away because she'd never seen such an expression on him before. "Yes, Valery Andreevich. Yes, I understand. Of course, hold on. He hung up and looked at his wife with a gaze she'd never seen on him before. Detached, appraising, alien, as if recalculating assets in his mind and discovering the balance had gone negative. Artem, Inga whispered. What now? He didn't answer, just silently walked past her into the living room where Yulia Stepanovna was already craning her neck trying to overhear the conversation. What happened? Asked her mother-in-law, and in her voice Inga heard not worry but some greedy curiosity. Artem briefly recounted the news. Yulia Stepanovna threw up her hands, approached Inga, hugged her by the shoulders. Hold on, dear, she said with rehearsed concern in her voice. We'll get through it together. Everything will be fine. But Inga noticed how her mother-in-law exchanged a quick, knowing glance with her son over her shoulder, and in that glance there wasn't a drop of the warmth that sounded in her voice. That night, Inga lay awake, staring at the strip of light under the door and listening to the muffled voices from the study. Artem had gone there right after dinner and didn't return until morning, and she never dared get up and find out what they were talking about with his mother for so long. The change came at dawn, sharp and merciless, as if someone had torn away the theatrical curtain behind which hid an entirely different set. Good morning, our princess, Yulia Stepanovna chirped when Inga came into the kitchen, and her voice rang with poorly concealed mockery. Or now no longer a princess. How's Daddy? Recovered after falling from Olympus? Mom, Artem looked up from his phone but didn't finish, just waved his hand and buried himself in the screen again, making it clear he had no intention of intervening. What, Mom? I didn't say anything wrong. Just inquiring about relatives' health. Isn't that allowed? Inga silently poured herself water her hands obeyed poorly, and a few drops spilled on the countertop. Oh, be careful, Miss Mitrofanova. Yulia Stepanovna demonstratively wiped the drops with a napkin, crumpled it, and tossed it toward the trash bin. Get used to cleaning up after yourself. We don't have servants, you know. We are simple folk, not like some who grew up in mansions. Yulia Stepanovna, Inga forced herself to speak calmly, though inside everything contracted from humiliation and incomprehension. I always clean up myself. You know that. I know. Only before it was a whim, such a lady's amusement. Now you'll have to for real. Feel the difference, or should I explain in detail? Artem got up from the table, muttered something about an important call, and left the kitchen, citing work matters. Inga watched his back, hoping he'd turn around, say something, stand up for her, his wife. He didn't turn around. The days dragged on in a grey succession of humiliations, each striking her with a methodical cruelty from which there was no defense. Yulia Stepanovna, as if unleashed from a chain, compensated for years of forced politeness when a simple woman from Novichokazk had to curry favor with her rich daughter-in-law. Now she reveled in revenge her hatred, accumulated under the mask of kindness all those 5 years, finally broke free. She criticized everything. How Inga cooked, cleaned, dressed, spoke, breathed. Every morning started with new remarks. Every evening ended with a silent dinner where Artem poked at his phone and his mother-in-law sipped insults in small gulps, savoring each word. Look at yourself, she'd say, eyeing her daughter-in-law from head to toe with a contemptuous gaze. Pay for this. Before, at least you bought something new, fashionable. Now, apparently, nothing. You'll have to get used to the new life, dear. Inga was silent. She had learned to be silent because it was easier than arguing, easier than running into the wall of her husband's indifference every time. At work, colleagues noticed the change. The gaunt face, the dull gaze, the absent-mindedness in lessons when she forgot where she'd left off. The vice principal pulled her aside after a staff meeting, quietly asked if everything was okay at home. Inga forced a smile and lied that she was just tired. Lots of work, everything's fine. One night, when Yulia Stepanovna had long gone to her room and lights seeped under the study door, Inga couldn't take it anymore. She found Artem in the living room. He was sitting by the window with a glass of whiskey, staring at the lights of the nighttime city sprawled beyond the river. We need to talk, Inga said, sitting across from him in the armchair. It's late. Tomorrow. No, now. He sighed irritably, set the glass on the windowsill. Well, speak. What's so urgent? You see how your mother treats me? Do you see at all what's happening in this house? Inga, she's just worried. The situation's tough. Everyone's nerves are on edge. You understand. Worried. Inga felt something hot and bitter boiling in her chest, bursting out. She insults me every day, calls me a freeloader, a lady, a princess, and you act like nothing's happening. You go to the study or bury yourself in your phone. Well, what do you want me to do? He raised his voice, and Inga flinched involuntarily at the tone. Kick out my own mother? I want you to tell her it's not okay. That I'm your wife, not some servant you can humiliate. Artem stood up, and undisguised irritation flashed in his eyes, sharp and cold. You know what? You're just making it worse. Instead of enduring a bit until things settle, you throw scenes in the middle of the night. I work 12 hours a day, come home exhausted, and here you are with your complaints and grudges. Endure. Enough. He slapped his palm on the armchair armrest, and the sound seemed deafening to Inga in the nighttime silence of the apartment. I'm tired of this. Sort it out yourselves. I'm not going to be a referee for your women's squabbles. He went to the bedroom, slamming the door, and Inga remained sitting in the dark, staring at the city lights outside the window, and for the first time in 5 years of marriage felt utterly, irrevocably alone. That night, she first thought of divorce. The word flashed through her mind briefly, but she immediately pushed it away. Where would she go? A schoolteacher's salary would barely cover a rented room somewhere on the outskirts. Her parents now needed help themselves, and there was no one else. A month passed, then another week. Inga got used to the new reality, or convinced herself she had, that one could exist in this mode endlessly. She got up before everyone, made breakfast, cleaned the apartment, endured the morning dose of barbs from her mother-in-law, went to work, returned, made dinner, cleaned again, fell into bed and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Mechanical existence with no room left for hope of change. And suddenly everything changed just as abruptly as a month and a half ago. One evening, Artem returned from work earlier than usual with a bouquet of white roses, her favorites, the very ones he gave her every anniversary. Mom went to a friend's in Novichokazk for a couple days, he said, extending the flowers with a smile Inga hadn't seen in a very long time. We need to talk. Just the two of us, without outsiders. He sat her on the living room sofa, took her hand. His fingers were warm, familiar, just like before all this nightmare, before her father's call, before the masks fell. Inga, forgive me. She froze, not believing her ears, afraid to move. I've been acting like a complete idiot, he continued, kissing her hand, stroking her wrist with his thumb. Mom, yes, she overdid it. I should have stopped her long ago, from the start. I have no excuse, I know. Artem, wait, let me finish. This is important. I've thought a lot all this time about us, about your father, about everything that's happened. I found a way to help your family, our family. He spoke of a loan against the penthouse for 28 million rubles that could be invested in restoring his father-in-law's business, that with Valery Andreevich's experience and connections, he'd get back on his feet in a year, 2 at most, 3. Money can be earned again. Artem looked her in the eyes, his gaze so sincere, so familiar that her eyes stung from rising tears. A new apartment can be bought. As long as there are hands and a head. You can't get family back. Inga, your father built his empire his whole life, put health and years into it. Are we really going to let it collapse for good when we can help? Inga listened, and something inside her, squeezed during these weeks of suffering and humiliations, began to loosen gradually, giving way to something warm and forgotten. There he was, the real Artem, the same man she married 5 years ago in the sun-flooded restaurant. The one who loved her, who was ready to risk their home, their future for her family. His recent cruelty was a temporary eclipse from stress, from fear of the unknown, and now he was back to her, her Artem. She laid her head on his shoulder, and he hugged her for the first time in a month and a half. His arms were so reliable, so familiar that all the bitter memories of the recent weeks began to recede, dissolving in this embrace. They sat like that until deep into the night, and Artem talked about plans, about how everything would work out, and Inga listened and believed every word because she wanted to believe, because after a month and a half of cold and humiliations, this sudden tenderness seemed like a gulp of air after long suffocation. The next morning, he brought documents. A thick stack of papers written in small legal print, yellow stickers on pages needing her signature. Standard bank forms, Artem explained, laying out the folders on the dining table. Loan application, pledge agreement, various consents. The appraiser comes tomorrow at 9. Applications already submitted, so need to sign today. Inga took the first page, tried to read the tangle of terms and code article references, but the letters blurred before her eyes, and the meaning slipped away, hiding behind bureaucratic turns. Artem, there's so much here. Maybe I take a day to look carefully? A day? He sighed, and his voice held mild reproach. Inga, appraiser's scheduled for tomorrow. If not signed today, process starts over. That's at least 2 more weeks. Every day delayed is a day your father sinks in debts. She looked at him, and something inside resisted a quiet voice whispered why so urgent, why can't wait, why he's rushing. But another voice, louder and more insisted he's ready to risk your home for your family, and you can't even trust him. Don't you trust me? Asked Artem. His eyes looked at her with such sincere pain that she felt ashamed of her doubts. After all I'm ready to do for your father. No, of course I trust. Inga reached for the pen. Just wanted to understand what I'm signing. Standard forms. Can't change them. Bank sends ready package. Here, here, and here. He pointed to yellow stickers, flipping pages. And here too. She signed without reading, page after page with each signature. The voice of doubt grew quieter until it silenced completely. When the last paper joined the stack, Artem gathered the documents and put them in the briefcase. Inga didn't notice how for an instant the corners of his lips twitched, not in a smile of relief but in the triumph of a player getting a trump card. Several days passed. Inga prepared a festive dinner. Soup from her mother-in-law's recipe and homemade cutlets, wanting to thank her husband for his sacrifice, for readiness to risk their home. She set the table in the living room, lit candles, got out the good dishes they usually saved for special occasions. Artem returned from work later than usual, and with him came Yulia Stepanovna. Just dropped by casually, she explained, though her visits were never casual. We need to talk, said Artem, his voice as cold as in the first days after her father's call. Sit. Inga sat in the armchair, feeling something clench inside from a bad premonition. Artem tossed a folder with documents on the table, the same one she'd signed days ago. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung in the air, and Inga couldn't grasp their meaning for several seconds, as if her husband had spoken in an unknown language. What? But you, I don't love you anymore. He said it without a trace of emotion, stating a fact. And I don't intend to bear the burden of your unlucky family. Artem, what are you saying? She stood, stepped toward him. Just days ago you swore you wanted to help Dad, that you were ready to risk our home, our life. Too different. He stepped back, avoiding her touch. I can't be with a woman who isn't. With such a load. Yulia Stepanovna, sitting in the sofa corner, leaned forward, and her face bloomed with a smile Inga saw for the first time. Triumphant, malicious, without a hint of feigned warmth. And what did you think, dear? Her mother-in-law's voice dripped venom. That my son married you for love. He put up with you 5 years only because of your daddy and his millions. Now that your Mitrofanov development is worthless, why does he need you? Inga looked from husband to mother-in-law, and the room spun around her, losing outlines. Just days ago he hugged her, talked about the future, how they'd overcome difficulties together. It was all a lie, every word, every gesture. But the apartment, she clutched at the last hope. It's my father's gift. I have rights to it. I'm not going anywhere. Artem exchanged a glance with his mother, and both laughed shortly and unpleasantly. The apartment. He pulled several sheets from the folder. Remember the documents you signed for the bank? This is consent to remove the encumbrance, that very sale ban your daddy entered in the gift agreement. And this is the gift agreement for your share of the penthouse to me, notarized as proper. Inga snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes darted over lines, catching words. Voluntarily and gratuitously transfers her share to Kamenev A.S. And her own signature at the bottom, the same one she'd put without reading, trusting her husband. You deceived me. Her voice broke. It was a trap from the start. Who can you blame? Artem took back the documents, neatly folded them into the folder. You signed yourself, with your own hand, willingly. No coercion, no threats. Just a stupid, trusting wife who doesn't read what she signs. She lunged at him, trying to snatch the folder, but he easily pushed her, and Inga fell on the parquet, the same parquet they'd chosen together 5 years ago when moving into this home. Pack your things, Artem threw, looking down at her. You have an hour. Inga didn't leave. She locked herself in the bedroom and refused to come out, ignoring knocks on the door and threats to call the police. Several lawyers she consulted by phone said the same. Without proof of fraud, recordings, or witnesses, chances are practically nil. Documents are drafted competently. She decided to go to court herself. The hearing in the district court lasted 40 minutes and was remembered as an unending nightmare. Artem's lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit, presented the gift agreement as a voluntary act of a wife's love for her husband, a show of gratitude for years of happy marriage. Inga, stumbling and swallowing tears, tried to explain she'd been deceived, that her husband slipped the documents under the guise of bank forms. The judge asked for evidence. There was none. No recordings, no witnesses, nothing but her words against his. The court recognized the gift agreement as legal. 3 days after the ruling, Inga didn't leave the room. On the 4th, Artem, irritated by her stubbornness, decided to deliver the final blow. He entered the living room where Yulia Stepanovna sat, pulled out his phone, and dialed his father-in-law. Put on speaker. Valery Andreevich, his voice oozed mockery. This is your former son-in-law. Take your burden from my apartment before I call the police. Inga froze in the bedroom doorway, unable to move. What? Old Bankrupt, didn't expect it. Artem continued, savoring each word. Your little daughter is now homeless like you. You can wander rented corners together. I give you an hour, here. An hour and I'm calling the squad. On the other end, something clinked, the sound of a breaking cup. Yulia Stepanovna giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Inga rushed to her phone, dialed her father with trembling fingers. She prepared to hear a broken old man, crushed by humiliation. Instead, the receiver sounded with the voice she remembered from childhood. Calm, commanding, brooking no objections. That's how her father spoke in negotiations when billion-ruble contracts were at stake. Listen to me carefully, said Valery Andreevich. Don't go anywhere. Lock yourself in the room and don't open the door no matter what they say, no matter what they do. Don't engage in conversations. Don't react to provocations. Understood. Dad, what? Understand me, Inga. Yes. But trust your father. I'll be there in 3 minutes. The connection cut. Inga stood in the middle of the room, staring at the phone in her hand, unable to understand what was happening. Her father's voice wasn't that of a defeated man who'd lost everything. It was the voice of a commander before the decisive battle. She locked the door and went to the window. Exactly 3 minutes later, Inga checked the clock. At the entrance of the elite building on the embankment stopped a black Rolls-Royce. Behind it, 2 executive sedans, and closing the column, a massive SUV. From the main car emerged her father, not in a cheap jacket of a bankrupt wretch but in an Italian tailor suit with a branded watch on his wrist. Following him was a lawyer with a leather briefcase, and from the SUV spilled security in black uniforms, about 10 at least. Inga pressed her forehead to the glass, and tears streamed down her cheeks, but these were different tears, not those she'd shed the past week. On the balcony facing the same side stood Artem and Yulia Stepanovna. Inga saw them from her window, saw how smug smiles slid from their faces, replaced by confusion, then bewilderment, then something like horror. Bankrupt old men don't ride in Rolls-Royces with security and expensive lawyers. Bankrupt old men don't move with such confidence of an owner returning to his domain. Artem backed from the railing, and Yulia Stepanovna clutched his elbow, and her face showed realization, terrible and belated. That everything went wrong, that they miscalculated, that the trap they thought theirs snapped shut on the wrong victim. Inga watched her father disappear into the entrance doors, and for the first time in this month and a half felt she could breathe fully. The apartment door opened without a knock. Security entered first, silently taking positions along the living room walls, and following appeared Valery Andreevich accompanied by the lawyer with a heavy leather briefcase evidently stuffed with documents. Inga came out of her room and froze on the living room threshold, not daring to step further. Her father, noticing her, nodded barely perceptibly. Everything's okay. I'm here now. Everything will be fine. Artem and Yulia Stepanovna stood by the balcony door, pressed together, and their faces froze with the expression of people seeing a ghost, the same shock Inga once saw in a documentary about earthquake victims, when the ground slips away and the habitual world collapses in an instant. Valery Andreevich crossed the living room with unhurried, proprietary stride and sank onto the sofa, the very one where an hour ago the triumphant son-in-law dictated capitulation terms. He crossed his legs and folded his hands on his knees, looking like a man returned to his own home after brief absence. Valery Andreevich, Artem squeezed out, his voice hoarse, broken, nothing like an hour ago when he insulted the bankrupt wretch over the phone. How is this? We thought. I know what you thought. That was the plan. Yulia Stepanovna let out a choke sound like a sob and clutched her son's arm so hard her fingers dug into his shirt fabric. I don't understand. Artem muttered. His gaze darted around the room from security to lawyer, from lawyer to father-in-law. The holding, banks, credit line, sale of the house in Oksana, spectacle. Valery Andreevich pronounced the word with undisguised pleasure, drawing out syllables. A month-long spectacle to test what my son-in-law is capable of when the golden rain dries up and you have to rely only on yourself. And you, Artem Sergeyevich, showed yourself in full glory, even better than I expected. The lawyer, Ignat Zinovevich Voltsanin, a tall man in a strict suit whom Inga had seen several times at family celebrations and her father's business receptions, opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder with time-yellowed documents. Ignat Zinovevich, be so kind. Valery Andreevich nodded to him, settling more comfortably on the sofa. With pleasure. The lawyer put on thin gold-rimmed glasses and unfolded the first sheet dotted with small typographic print. Gift agreement dated June 15, 2019, registered in Rosrista under number. Well, that's unimportant. Page 27, clause 14.3. Reading literally. In accordance with Article 578 of the Civil Code of the Russian Federation, the donor has the right to revoke the gift in case of dissolution of the donee's marriage with the donor's daughter at the initiative or fault of the donee. Upon revocation of the gift, all subsequent transactions with the real estate object are deemed void. Artem jerked, his face taking on a greyish tint. This wasn't in the agreement. I'd have noticed. It was. Valery Andreevich looked at him without anger, almost with pity, as one looks at a foolish child who punished himself. On the 27th page, in small print, in the special conditions paragraph. You didn't read what you signed, right? Too eager to get back to guests and champagne. Too eager to get the keys to a 60 million apartment. Inga leaned on the door jamb, her legs buckling from realizing the scale of her father's foresight. He knew from the start, from the first day of her marriage, from that very wedding in June sun. He foresaw the possibility of betrayal and laid legal straw, irrefutable, hidden in the depths of a 40-page agreement. Since you yourselves initiated the divorce process, continued lawyer Voltsanin in the tone of a lecturer explaining obvious things to negligent students, all subsequent transactions with this property, including the so-called gift agreement from Inga Valerievna which you extracted by deceit, are void from the moment of signing. The apartment returns to the ownership of the original donor, that is, Valery Andreevich Mitrofanov. This is illegal, Yulia Stepanovna squealed, her voice breaking into falsetto. We'll appeal in appeal. We'll hire the best lawyers. We'll go to the Supreme Court. Valery Andreevich slowly turned to her, and something sharp, dangerous flashed in his gaze, such that Yulia Stepanovna cut off mid-word. Well, since you're so resolute, let's talk about legality. Ignat Zinovevich, show our guests the second gift, the one I saved in case they prove stubborn. The lawyer pulled a tablet from the briefcase, turned it on, and turned the screen to Artem and his mother. On the recording, Inga saw the reflection in the balcony door glass. Some restaurant office with dim light and heavy curtains, and Artem leaning over the table to an interlocutor whose face was hidden in shadow. The official is reliable? Asked Artem on the recording, lowering his voice. Absolutely reliable. Works in Rosrista 15 years. 200,000 cash and re-registration will pass in a week without extra questions. 60% to me, 40 to you from the sale. When I get rid of this apartment, we'll settle right away. And your father? No problems. Artem on the recording laughed an unpleasant, smug laugh of a man sure of impunity. The old bankrupt himself handed it on a platter, didn't even have to ask. Raised his daughter a stuffed fool. Signed everything without looking, just to help daddy. Ones like her are made to be plucked. Valery Andreevich pressed pause, and the silence in the room became deafening. The official you so nicely negotiated a bribe with, he said, his voice calm, almost affectionate, works in my security service for 7 years now. It was a trap, Artem, and you jumped into it head first. Attempted bribery of an official under Article 291 of the Criminal Code. Up to 8 years imprisonment. Plus fraud on an especially large scale under Article 159. Up to 10 more years. You can calculate yourself how much you'll spend in the colony." Artem's face turned earthen. He staggered, grabbing the chair back. Yulia Stepanovna recoiled from her son, looking at him with horror and rage at once. You didn't tell me about the bribe," she hissed, her face twisted in a grimace. "You promised everything would be clean, that we'd just divorce and take the apartment legally. Mom, I thought." "Shut up. Because of you, because of your greed, now I'm under article like a common criminal. Yulia Stepanovna, formally you pass as a witness, not an accomplice," clarified Lawyer Voltanen with a hint of a smile. "For now. But that can easily change if the investigation establishes your awareness of your son's plans." Valery Andreevich rose from the sofa and approached the window, hands behind his back, gazing at the evening dawn where a barge with sand slowly floated. "You have a choice," he said without turning. "First option. I hand this recording to the investigative committee tonight, and you both go to the bunks. You, Artem, for 12 years, your mother at least for 3 as an accessory. Second option. You sign notarized waivers of any claims to this apartment and commitments never, hear me, never to appear in my daughter's life. No calls, no letters, no social media messages, no chance street meetings. Choose." The silence hanging in the room was so thick and viscous that Inga heard her own breathing, the ticking of the wall clock, and somewhere far below, the horn of a passing river tug. Artem exchanged a glance with his mother, a short, hunted look of defeated people understanding there's no way out, all doors locked and keys in others' hands. "We'll sign," he croaked, lowering his head. The notary, a short woman in a strict dress who arrived with the cordage and patiently waited in the hallway all this time, entered the living room with a case, laid out papers on the dining table. Artem signed the documents without lifting his eyes, and Yulia Stepanovna put her signature with a trembling hand, sniffling and muttering something about an ungrateful son who ruined both their lives with his exorbitant greed. "You have an hour to pack," announced Valery Andreevich when the last document was sealed. "Personal items. All clothes, documents, furniture, appliances, interior items. All stays as belonging to the apartment. Security, led by Security Chief Lavrenti Zakharovich Marsov, a broad-shouldered man with military bearing, escorted them to the rooms, and for the next hour Inga sat in the kitchen staring at the cooled festive dinner she'd prepared all day in thanks for her husband's sacrifice. Now it seemed something from another life, another century, a parallel universe where she still believed in his love. Her father sat beside, placed his warm palm on her cold hand. "Forgive me for what you had to go through," he said quietly, and in his voice for the first time that evening sounded not command but weariness and tenderness. "I had to know for sure who he was, and you had to learn not from my words but yourself, with your own eyes. You suspected him from the start? From the start I prepared for the worst, though hoped for the best. You know, daughter, if he'd turned out a decent man, if he'd supported you and me in these hard times, shown loyalty, decency, I'd have made him my partner, brought him into the business, given him executive director position over time and half the holding. He'd have gotten everything he could dream of, everything he married you for. And instead he chose a 60 million apartment and lost a future 1,000 times more valuable. Such is the price of greed and short-sightedness that sees no further than its own nose." Exactly an hour later, not a minute more, Artem and Yulia Stepanovna exited the entrance with several bags stuffed with personal things, and neighbors who came out to balconies to admire the unusual sight of a luxury car cordage at their house and black uniformed security followed them with gazes full of undisguised curiosity and schadenfreude. By evening, the whole building knew the Kameneves were thrown out as fraudsters, and rumors, accruing new details, spread in days, reaching every office and construction site. A week passed. Inga began gradually coming to herself, getting used to the silence of the emptied apartment, to the thought that it was all over and she could finally exhale. One late evening, when lanterns already lit on the embankment outside the window, the intercom rang, and on the screen she saw a man she barely recognized. Unshaven, gaunt, in wrinkled clothes, with sunken cheeks and feverish gleam in eyes. "Inga, please." Artem's voice in the speaker sounded hoarse, broken, pleading. "I need to talk to you. 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. I beg." She stood long before the intercom screen, staring at this face, the face of the man she'd loved 5 years, trusted without reservation, for whom she was ready to sacrifice everything. Then, obeying some inner impulse, she pressed the button and opened the door. Not from pity, but to put a period, to close this chapter once and for all. He entered the apartment and stopped on the living room threshold, not daring to go further, looking around as if not recognizing the familiar walls. He was fired from Yugostroy the day after the scandal. In Rostov's construction business, everyone knows each other. Information spreads instantly, and the story of that very Kamenev who wanted to rob his father-in-law became proverbial. No serious company wanted to deal with a man so publicly disgraced. His mother took to bed with her heart right after eviction. Doctors diagnosed a microstroke and said recovery would take months. I lost everything. He dropped to his knees right in the middle of the room, tears in his eyes. Inga, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I acted like a total beast. But I'm ready for anything. I'll find any job, even loader, handyman. I'll work off every kopeck. Just give me one more chance to fix it. She looked down at him, at the man who a month ago demanded over the phone that her father take his burden, who called her a stuffed fool on the restaurant recording, who turned a month and a half of her life into unending nightmare for an apartment and money. Get up, she said, and her own voice seemed alien, unfamiliar. I don't want to see you on your knees. He rose, clutching the table edge, and hope flared in his gaze, pathetic, desperate, last. I might forgive you someday, Inga said, looking him in the eyes. For my own peace, for my own soul. Not for you. But return to the past, trust you again, let you into my life again. That won't happen ever. Go and don't appear again. She closed the door behind him and didn't turn when he shouted something in the hallway, begging to listen. Just stood with forehead pressed to the cold wood and cried. These were the last tears for a love that never existed, for a dream that turned out a mirage. Months passed, then a year, then two. Inga quit the school and enrolled in interior design courses at Rostov Architecture Academy. She'd dreamed of it since university, but Artem considered such pursuits Ansarayu's women's nonsense unworthy of attention. Now no one told her what to do or dream. The penthouse on the embankment was a place of pain and triumph at once. She completely redid it with her own hands, turning it into her first professional project. New wall colors, new furniture, new curtains, nothing to remind of the past life or the man who once lived here. 2 years later, she opened her own small studio in the city center, in an old house on Bolshaya Sadovaya. Sometimes rumors about Artem reached her. Rostov is a big city, but the circle of builders and businessmen is tight. Everyone knows each other and gladly shares news. He wasn't hired at any decent company, reputation destroyed forever, and in the end he left with his mother for Taganrog to some distant relatives willing to shelter them at first. Yulia Stepanovna, after the stroke, turned from a domineering, sarcastic woman into a sick old lady dependent on the son she'd raised a fraudster and now blamed for all her misfortunes. At an interior design exhibition in Rostov Exhibition Center, Inga accidentally met Georgy Nekrasov. They'd studied together at SFU in different faculties, crossed paths in common lectures but hadn't seen each other in 10 years. He became an architect specializing in social projects, designed affordable housing for young families. His eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm when he talked about his work. They exchanged phones, started working together on joint projects. He designed buildings, she created interiors. Then they started dating, and it all was so natural, so right, without masks or calculations, without glancing at someone's millions and connections. 3 years later they married. The wedding was modest. Registration in the old registry office on Pushkinskaya Street. Dinner in a small restaurant for 20 closest people. No pomp or show. Instead of an expensive designer dress, one Inga sewed herself from her own sketch of Italian silk. Valery Andreevich, leading his daughter to the registrar's table, cried for the first time in many years. He who'd gone through the 90s, survived dozens of crises and betrayals, cried from happiness because his girl finally found a man who loved her herself, not her family status, not business prospects, not the embankment apartment. When they exited the registry to the sun-flooded street, Georgie took her hand and smiled, just smiled without words, with that smile without calculation or ulterior motive, and Inga understood all she'd lived through wasn't in vain. Betrayal taught her to distinguish real from fake, true love from its skillful imitation, and pain tempered her and made her stronger. She was no longer that naive girl who believed in fairy tales.